Every year, McDonald sells more than 5 billion burgers worldwide. That is roughly 25 million cows per year for one company, for one product. Here is the number nobody says out loud. Global livestock farming produces 14.5% of all greenhouse gases on the planet, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. All aviation worldwide, 2.5%. The entire meat and dairy industry pollutes the atmosphere 6 times more than every plane on every route of every airline in the world, combined. That figure does not come from activists. It comes from an international scientific body of the United Nations. One more thing before we go further. Methane from cattle and carbon dioxide from jet engines behave differently in the atmosphere. Methane is far more powerful as a greenhouse gas in the short term, but breaks down in roughly 10 years. Carbon dioxide from aviation accumulates and stays for centuries. The comparison is real, but it is not simple. And anyone who tells you it is simple is not being fully honest with you. But beef was not always an everyday food. It was not always cheap.
It was not always something most families could afford. What sits in the refrigerator of billions of households today was, for most of human history, a rare luxury for the few. To understand how one type of meat came to occupy the center of the plate for a significant portion of humanity and what that victory is costing the planet, we need to go back 10,500 years to a mountain range between modern Turkey and Syria where all of this began. The aurochs is an animal most people have never seen and never will. The last one died in 1627 in Poland. But for hundreds of thousands of years, aurochs dominated the plains of Eurasia and North Africa. These were enormous animals. Bulls stood close to 6 feet at the shoulder and weighed up to 1,500 kilograms, horns up to 80 centimeters long. For comparison, a modern dairy cow weighs around 600 kilograms. The aurochs was more than twice the size and incomparably more dangerous. A hunter facing an aurochs in the wild was not looking at livestock. He was looking at something closer to an armored vehicle made of muscle and bone. Around 10,500 years ago, in the region of the Fertile Crescent between modern Turkey, Syria, and Iraq, a small group of people did something extraordinary. They began domesticating these animals. Genetic studies published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences show that all modern cattle breeds in the world descend from a founding population of roughly 80 wild aurochs domesticated in that region over a relatively short period. 80 animals. From them, over 1 billion cattle today. Domestication was not fast or simple. People needed generations of selection, choosing calmer animals, less aggressive bulls, those that produced more milk or pulled a plow more reliably. The aurochs did not simply become a cow. It was gradually remade, bone by bone, generation by generation, to fit the needs of agricultural civilization. Separately and independently, a second domestication occurred in India from a local subspecies of aurochs. This produced zebu, the humped cattle that still dominate South Asia, Africa, and tropical regions worldwide. 2 independent domestications of the same species on 2 ends of a continent, thousands of years apart. As farmers from the Middle East expanded westward, they brought their cattle with them. By the 6th millennium before the Common Era, domestic cattle had appeared on the shores of the Mediterranean. By the 4th millennium, on the British Isles. Everywhere these first farmers went, they brought their herds. Wild aurochs still existed alongside them and occasionally crossbred with domestic stock, confirmed by ancient DNA analysis. But cattle at that time were not primarily meat. They were draft power, sources of milk, hides, bones for tools, and dung for fertilizer. Beef was eaten rarely, mostly old or sick animals that could no longer work. Meat was a byproduct. It remained that way for most of human civilization, until the railroads arrived, and the cold. In 1860, most cattle in the United States were born, lived, and died within a few hundred miles of where they were eaten. Meat was a local product by necessity. Without refrigeration, a carcass spoiled too quickly for long-distance transport. The beef on a wealthy New Yorker's table and the beef on a Texas farmer's table came from entirely different animals in entirely different places. Within 46 years, all of that changed. In 1865, the Union Stockyards opened in Chicago, a single, centralized slaughterhouse and processing complex that by 1906 was receiving cattle from across the American West. An animal could be born in Texas, shipped by rail through Kansas, slaughtered in Chicago, and eaten in New York, all within a matter of weeks. Two inventions made this possible. The first was the refrigerated railroad car, perfected in the 1870s, which allowed chilled carcasses to travel thousands of miles without spoiling. The second was the disassembly line of the Chicago slaughterhouses. Carcasses moved on hooks through the building while stationary workers performed the same single operation again and again. A young Henry Ford visited a Chicago meatpacking plant and was so struck by the efficiency that he used the concept as the basis for his automobile assembly line. By 1890, four companies, Armour, Swift, Hammond, and Morris, controlled the majority of the entire meatpacking industry. In practice, it was a cartel. They fixed prices, drove local butchers out of business across the country, and paid their workers so little that nothing changed, regardless of how much beef they produced. By the turn of the 20th century, meatpacking had become the largest industry in the United States by sales volume, over $1 billion per year, exceeding the annual budget of the federal government. In 1906, writer Upton Sinclair published The Jungle, a documentary novel about working conditions in the Chicago slaughterhouses. He described meat mixed with rat carcasses, diseased animals sent into production, and a total absence of sanitary oversight. Sinclair wanted to draw attention to the conditions facing immigrant workers. Instead, he terrified Americans about the quality of the meat they were eating. President Theodore Roosevelt read the book and immediately ordered a government inspection of the stockyards. That same year, Congress passed the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act. Beef became regulated, standardized, mass-produced. When it became mass-produced, it became cheap. When it became cheap, it became everyday. And when it became everyday, he arrived. April 1955. Ray Kroc opened the first McDonald's restaurant in Des Plaines, Illinois. He did not invent the burger or the grill. He did something far more consequential. He turned food production into an industrial process independent of location, time, and the skill of individual workers. The same patty, the same flavor, the same cooking temperature in every restaurant, in every city, in every country. But a standardized burger required a standardized cow, and a standardized cow required genetics, selective breeding, standardized feed, standardized slaughter, and a logistics chain that could deliver identical cuts from one end of a continent to the other. The burger that looks the same in Tokyo and Toronto did not happen by accident. It required the construction of one of the most complex industrial supply chains in human history. By the 1980s, McDonald's had expanded to Japan, Australia, Canada, Brazil, and most of Western Europe. By the end of the 20th century, to China and most of Asia. With the company came a standard. A beef burger must be accessible and cheap at any point on the planet. To meet that requirement, suppliers capable of producing beef in industrial quantities at minimum cost were needed. Argentina and Brazil became the answer. The Argentine pampas offered ideal conditions: mild climate, rich grasslands, enormous land resources. Argentina became one of the world's largest beef producers and exporters. But Argentina was already developed. The real expansion happened in Brazil, and it happened at the cost of the forest. From 2001 to 2015, over 45 million hectares of forest worldwide were converted to cattle pasture, an area equal to the size of Sweden, according to Harvard researchers. Cattle ranching is the #1 cause of deforestation in virtually every country in the Amazon basin, accounting for 80% of total forest clearing, according to the World Wildlife Fund. An investigation by the independent Brazilian outlet Reporter Brazil documented cases where beef from illegally cleared ranches was moved between farms to disguise its origin, then shipped to slaughterhouses that supply McDonald's. Beef accounts for 28% of McDonald's total corporate carbon footprint, nearly as much as the operation of all 34,500 of its restaurants worldwide. A cow produces methane,
This is a natural part of how ruminants digest food. Microorganisms in a cow's stomach break down plant cellulose and produce methane as a byproduct, which the animal exhales and belches into the atmosphere. 1 kilogram of beef generates between 28 and 35 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent during production. 1 kilogram of chicken generates around 6 kilograms. 1 kilogram of tofu, less than 3. Global livestock farming produces 14.5% of all anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions on the planet, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. All aviation worldwide accounts for 2.5%. The gap is real, and it is rarely discussed with the seriousness it deserves. But here is the distinction that honest reporting requires. Methane from cattle and carbon dioxide from aviation are different gases with different behaviors. Methane is far more powerful as a warming agent in the short term, but it breaks down in the atmosphere in roughly 10 years. Carbon dioxide from aviation fuel accumulates and remains in the atmosphere for hundreds and potentially thousands of years. The comparison is scientifically valid, but it is not as simple as a single headline makes it seem. Any serious conversation about climate requires understanding this difference. The science does not say that everyone must stop eating beef entirely. The science says that current production and consumption levels are incompatible with the climate targets humanity has set for itself. Researchers project that to hold warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius, global beef production must decline by at least 50% in most developed countries by 2050. That figure means that either consumption changes voluntarily or it changes under pressure from price, climate disruption, and legislation. Meanwhile, the average American consumes approximately 28 kilograms of beef per year. In Brazil, that figure is rising. In China, it is rising. In India, home to the fastest-growing middle class in the world, meat consumption increases every year. Global demand for beef is not falling. It continues to grow. 10,500 years ago, a small group of people in the mountains between Turkey and Syria domesticated 80 wild aurochs. They wanted a stable source of meat, milk, and labor. They were not thinking about greenhouse effects. They did not know the phrase deforestation. They simply wanted to eat and survive. Over 10,000 years, those 80 animals became 1 billion. Humanity built industrial empires around beef, railroads, refrigeration, global supply chains. Beef became a symbol of prosperity, of the American dream, of affordable luxury for the middle class across the world. And now, humanity faces a question that has no precedent in any earlier era of its history. What to do with a product that 1 billion people produce, another billion consume, and that places such a burden on the planet's atmosphere that no comfortable calculation makes the numbers work. A burger on a plate, a tree that no longer stands in Brazil, methane rising somewhere over the Argentine plains. These are not separate stories. They are one chain, the same animal, the same human need that began with 80 stunned aurochs in the mountains of the Fertile Crescent. Perhaps in 100 years, people will not be surprised that we ate beef. They will be surprised that we knew the cost and behaved as though nothing was happening.